Okay, so playing with the NatCell survey a little bit more then we'll move on to something slightly different. This again is another graph that has been produced from exactly the same data, except we're now incorporating more questions. Now, I don't want to talk too much about this graph. Again, I'm going to give you 5 minutes, okay? And I just want to say, here is a graph. Tell me what's happening here. Tell me the story, okay? So again, discuss in your tables. Okay, so the discussions have pretty much come to an end, I think. Perhaps a few people have noticed some more interesting things that they want to talk about. So, what have we noticed? What does this graph tell us? First of all, can you tell me how you should interpret this graph? So what information is being displayed here? So don't tell me the story, just tell me what information is being displayed here. So what 3 variables are being displayed? Absolutely right. So in other words, the squares represent first intercourse, when people first have sex, okay? And that typically, or that has to be, fairly obviously, the first thing that happens, yeah? Then the sort of diamond shape represents the first live-in relationship. In other words, you meet somebody, you get into a relationship with them, and then you move in together, okay? That's what first live-in relationship represents. And then the circles represent when somebody has their first child. Okay, when they have their first child. Okay, so they start a family. And again, in blue, you've got men, and in pink, you've got the females. Okay. Now, also, it's been grouped according to when somebody was being born. So it's basically 4-year intervals. Okay, so 35 to 39, 40 to 44, etc., etc., etc. Now, the first thing you need to notice is that there's some stars happening for people that were born after 1980. Why are there those stars happening? Why is the data not complete there? Exactly, it's because when the data was collected, they just haven't reached that point in their life yet. Yeah, they're not old enough to reach that point in their life yet, okay? But it's still telling us something interesting, so they decide to include it, okay? So again, this is a decision which you sometimes have to make as a statistician. When you have data that is incomplete, you have to think, do I still want to include that or do I want to take it out? Just so happens they've still included it because I think it still tells a nice story, okay? So, come on then, tell me the story. What's happening here? Tell me anything you've noticed.
So there is a downward slope. Is it correct to say that there is a
For which one?
In the first intercourse experience of people who tend to have sex earlier?
Absolutely right.
Time is passing by.
Perfect. So in other words, as time goes on, in other words, for people that were being born later in the century, yeah, you can see that the square, okay, has this sort of downwards trend, In other words, people are having sex at a younger age. People having sex at a younger age. I agree with that, okay? Now you can think maybe why that is the case. Perhaps society has changed, yeah? Society has changed, which means that people born in sort of 35, 40 would have sex much later in life and typically stay with that same sexual partner for the rest of their life. Okay, so the person they have sex with is typically the person that they will sort of stay with for the rest of life. Okay, whereas for people born perhaps maybe after 1970, the reason why it's happening younger is because attitudes towards sex has changed. Yeah, in other words, it's totally okay to go out and sleep with as many people as you like. You're not going to get judged. Yeah. Does that make sense? So because society has changed, you can maybe make a deduction about why people are having sex earlier. Okay? Right, what else can we notice?
The range of the age for man is larger than the women.
What do you mean by range?
Range.
So the length of the bars?
Yep.
Excellent. So the length of the bars, the reason why they've drawn this as a bar, sort of a bar which everything is joined together, yeah, is because you can make an inference. Typically, these 3 things happen in that order, right? You have sex with somebody for the first time, okay? You then move in with somebody in a relationship, then you settle down, you have a family. In other words, you have a child with them, okay? Now, the reason why they're all connected together is because the shorter the bar, it means it's happening in quite a close amount of time, yeah? So, for example, have a look at the females for people born between 1935 and 1939. So the females born between 35 and 39. Are you happy that everything is happening within about 4 years of each other? Yeah, can you see that? So they first have sex at age 20 and then they have a child at age 24, okay? So what you can probably infer is that they've only had maybe 1 or 2 sexual partners, then they just settle down with somebody. It's happening in quite a short space of time. Whereas have a look at people, say for example, females then that were born at 1980 and 1984. Are you happy now that the gap between those two things has now increased from 4 years to about 10 years, okay? So in other words, people are having sex earlier, but they're not settling down and starting a family until much later in life. Does that make sense? Yeah.
That shows that females settle first than men compared to their first intercourse.
Okay, that's another interesting point, yeah? So it shows that in general, because if you look at, well, okay, let's call settling down with somebody moving in together, okay? So we're looking at the diamond. Would you be happy that the females are consistently below the males? Yeah, they're consistently below the males, which means that females are much more ready to settle down with somebody than the males are.
But on another point we were discussing is women tend to have a partner older than them.
This is true. This is very true.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and this may go some way. So it's excellent. You're being a statistician there because you're noticing that. You're noticing that females are settling down at a younger age compared to males, which means that you can probably make the inference that females are more prepared to have partners who are older than them. Yes, that might well be the case. Excellent. Yeah. So you see that there's some kind of pattern going on there. There's a lot of data buried in there, and you can make a lot of patterns, you can make a lot of assumptions about what's happening here. You're being statisticians if you're doing that. Does that make sense? Yeah? Does anybody else notice anything different?
There's like a drop on 1940 to 44. I reckon like that was the Second World War where like birth rates.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really, really good point. Let me just clear that because that's really annoying. Yeah, so that's a really, really good point. So there was a drop-off in people born, say, 1940 to 1944. Perhaps the reason for that, you think about what was happening in society between the 1940 and 1944, the Second World War, right? So that may go some way towards explaining it.